Hello and welcome to Latitude Photography Podcast Live Edition. We are broadcasting live to you with our image reviews, listener image reviews. It's a little bit hot in my office tonight, so I usually do wear my hat. I'll wear it until I get too sweaty, and then I'm going to be just taking it off because I don't have air conditioning yet in my office, and it should happen next week. So everything will be much better in the office here next week with the AC. It got over about 100 degrees today, and it's about that in my office right now, maybe a little bit less. So let's get started with these images, shall we? If you are logging in just now, go ahead, and I'd love to see you put a comment there in the comments. Let me know who's here, maybe where you're from if you'd like. Just maybe send me a thumbs up emoji, something along those lines, so I know you're here. The topic for tonight's discussion, our images tonight, is spring flowers. I announced this a little over a month ago, where for the month of May, we would be looking at spring flowers. And we have 26 images to look at from a variety of listeners, and I really am grateful for all these listeners for submitting these images and allowing me to do this episode and showcase their images and talk about them, and also just enjoy the wonderful imagery that the listeners are submitting. Right, let's get to it. We have our first image up here. This fellow, he submitted an image last time, and so thank you, Trond, for submitting once again. Now, I don't have, since some of these images were submitted in collections, like 2 or 3 images were submitted, and I'm unable to see, when I capture these items, I'm unable to see the items that you write along with that in the main post. So when that happens. So I don't know, hopefully we can still work with it and get it to come together for us nicely. We have these 2 items that are kind of coming up and curling over, very wonderfully shallow depth of field, lots of good detail coming into these 2 elements. We have, with that shallow depth of field, we still get a slight sense of that background. And when we do that, we kind of give it a little sense of that environment, and that's nice. There's an item just above the top element that looks like another piece that's curved up and over. And that is, it's good to see that, but that darker piece on the border, it does feel a little bit, maybe a little bit distracting to the eye because it's the only thing that's out of focus that's that dark. Everything else that's out of focus is pretty well evenly toned. One thing I do think might work well in this image is giving it a little bit of a vignette. So if we were to darken those edges, darken the corners, darken the edges a little bit, we're going to provide a little bit of a focusing attention for the eye to come in right on those items. And if we're taking a look, this item that's in the front, shall we say, and is coming up and slightly angles to the right as it comes up, that gets pretty bright, and we just want to be able to really focus in on that. And if you darken the corners a little bit, darken the edges a little bit, it will probably achieve that goal for you. All right, so let's move on to the next image, and this one is by my friend Roland. And it's great to see this image coming in. I had a pleasure of doing some photography with her at this place called Growiser. It's just outside of Elgin, Oregon. I almost said La Grande, but it's a little closer to Elgin. And yes, she says, I've really been looking forward to spring flower season, wildflower season. Things are just beginning to bloom in eastern Oregon. Of course, this was submitted May 10, so things were just starting at that time. Here we are in the beginning of June, and it is just about, for some of these types of wildflowers, they're still going pretty strong, but it's going to start waning here shortly. On this image, the thing that's really fun with some of these images, and I know Lori likes to shoot these vintage lenses, and it gives us a good sense in that bokeh area, the regions that are just out of focus. It has a different tonality, a different quality, a different sense about it than a modern lens. It just looks slightly different, and it's really hard to put into words how differently that comes across. The shallow depth of field certainly on this image helps us take a look right at that item that's centrally composed, But the beautiful thing that we have about this image is we have a little bit of that slight S-curve in the stem. We have some of these leaves coming out, and then with that slight S-curve, that really relaxes us. I think it relaxes us just a little bit. It's a subtle curve. If this were zigzaggy or something like that, certainly that would create a little bit of extra energy, but it's a subtle curve. It's really relaxing. And then we have this item that's centrally composed, and then it's really sharp. We have some good details coming in, good color, good details, and really what sets this image out, there's one thing really that sets it out for me, is all of those blossoms up and around the top are out of focus, but we can see the brilliant yellow. We can see the different tonal values of, it almost feels like a pinkish color in that background area, and then the greens coming through. The only thing that kind of gets me a little bit on this image is that S-curve stem has a little bit of visual competition, because there's that item in the background that's fairly straight and fairly bright, and it's giving that stem that is holding up this flower a little bit of competition. And I just kind of wish we had a little bit darkening there, or otherwise shifting one way or the other. It's really a minor issue, so it's not anything that I would say is a huge thing to just say, oh, you must fix it. No, this is something that I do look to try and find ways to improve the photo just a little bit potentially, but really when it comes down to it, it's such a minor issue that it almost doesn't, it almost shouldn't be mentioned. And again, if you are just joining us, we're looking at spring flowers. It's the topic for May, and I delayed this live session until here in June just because things got kind of hectic there at the end of May, and then with the holiday weekend last weekend. I invite your comments, so go ahead and put your comments there in the item as we're doing this recording. I can see them here, and I would love to be able to react to any comments that you may have. All right, let's look at the next image that we have coming up here. And this image is, let's see, I have to get my other item going, by Trilby Steinberger. They say they're in Australia where it's very nearly winter, and I'm really glad you still submitted your image, because certainly when I put this out there, I said spring flowers, and I was like, oh, wait a second. Our friends on the other side of the world are going to feel like, it's autumn here. So yeah, I'm so glad that we still have some images coming through from Australia. Let's see, we have some shots from native Australia orchids from 2019 taken with a Nikon D300S and the Elinchrom macro lens that used to be used in the dental surgery. So I thought it would upload one of those. Awesome. And Levi Jansen from Minnesota, hello. Good to see you here. I'm glad to have you joining us on the show tonight. And as you have comments, if you want to chime in with any thoughts or ideas, I'm not going to guarantee I'll see every single one of them, but if there's any chance you want to join in a little bit, I would love to see that. So go for it and type in some comments too. The interesting thing here is certainly this macro lens that's used in dental surgery practices and the like. That's definitely going to be a special use case lens, but here we are out in the field using it to photograph these orchids, and that's just really cool. What I'm wondering, though, about is with that dental surgery lens, is that what is creating this interesting bouquet out here on the side? This is a little bit, these items out here onto the left side is what I'm looking at. These items feel a little bit, I don't know, they're not, sometimes we like to say, oh, they're creamy or whatever the case is. These are a little bit rougher on the edges as far as these out of focus areas are concerned. And it's totally not a bad thing. These lines that are being created, these out of focus sections, these out of focus lines that are being created, actually to me, they kind of mimic the shape of that orchid. And so there's a little bit of that, you look at the orchid, look at the shape of the orchid, and then we have this extra item out here on the outer periphery, and it is creating a little bit of this, almost an echo, a visual echo of the original form, the original flower form. And so that's kind of interesting to capitalize on that. we have a fairly wide field. We haven't filled the frame with the orchid, but then we have some of these other blooms of the orchid, and then these other areas that are out of focus, and it's just coming together. One thing I really like about this composition, we have a predominant sense of these three elements, these three blossoms that are primary in the scene. We do have one further back, but these three elements that are primary, two of them in focus, one of them not so as well in focus, but that's creating a triangle. Excuse me. And when you have that triangle shape, you're going to create a certain energy there that wouldn't otherwise be there. So we have this very calm and peaceful orchid blossom, and then we have those petals that are coming down from that orchid, and they're both pointing to these other orchids, and so your eye is invited to go either way. And so it just starts to make this almost circular pattern, but it's triangular. And I see Rick joins us from Nevada. Fantastic. Good to have you here. Thank you for joining us. One thing I would like to see on this image too, like I mentioned, I think in the first image there, a little bit of vignetting. Let's tone down, I think, a little bit on the edges, just so we elevate visually those items. We elevate those blossoms. And that, I think that would really help us really focus our attention on those blossoms and not potentially be distracted. Yeah, they're out of focus, but those items in the background are a little bit on the bright side of things, and it would help us give our full attention completely over to the flowers. All right, this next one I'm a big fan of because we have just a sea of flowers, and we have the different colors, so three dominant colors coming through. We have these bluish hues, we have these pink reddish tones, and then of course the green. And so this is from Gerald Sargent. Spring in Texas means fields of bluebonnets with some occasional added guests. I love how he put that. So yes, those bluebonnets, nice rich color. And then we've got the green, we've got the reds coming through. And then as you look up towards the top, at least, we have a little bit of yellow coming in too. That's kind of interesting to see those little yellow bits coming in. On an image like this, it basically takes into an idea more of a texture, more of an overall pattern and texture approach. And what's interesting too, we have what feels to me like a fairly distinct slice across the center where there's not that many flowers. So we have predominantly bluebonnets in the foreground. We have a slight slice where it's predominantly green. And then as we move back, it's even amounts, so just roughly even amounts of bluebonnets and whatever these other red flowers are. And then it transitions more to these reddish, purplish, magenta colored flowers. And so we have this transition happening in this field too. And so there's some visual interest there because of the transition, but it still comes into just saying this basic idea of it becomes its own texture. We're making it its own thing. And I like images like that because you start to remove them from being their individual pieces, and which can be awesome, don't get me wrong, but it just gives it a different sense, a different idea comes through when you have an image like this. What I think I would try and do on this image as a slight adjustment, and I have to say I'm going total experimental mode here, and I'm thinking about some images that I've done in the past for sure, but I'm really wanting to go total experimental mode to see, would this actually make sense? So if you were to take this image and you were to do what I'm suggesting and you're all like, no, I don't think so, I'm going to say totally makes sense. I get that. But I would have played around with maybe thinking a little bit on that texture slider and especially the clarity slider if you're using Lightroom. When you do that clarity slider especially, what you're going to do is you're going to enhance a little bit of that difference. You're going to take that contrast in the midtones and you're going to enhance that contrast in the midtones. And I think you're going to make those flowers jump a little bit more separated from the background. You still have detail in those green background areas. It's just you're going to have a little more, okay, these green items are what they are and these blue items are what they are. And they're going to have that sort of that conflict of contrast coming in between them, and it will create even more of a texture coming in, and then you have this patchwork quilt type of texture coming through this type of image. It would be interesting to see if that would work. I might also look to enhance the saturation just a tiny amount on those blue. I'm looking at my screen. I'm looking after Facebook crunched it down. I have a little bit of a, disconnect from the original image and the original intent from what Gerald was looking at doing. So, if you look at it again, if Gerald were to look at this image and he'd be like, no, this was saturated enough. Yeah, I'm gonna totally get with that, because it's just, we understand Facebook crunches things a little bit, a lot of bit, and it might turn into something that just doesn't make sense in the end. But yes, the overall approach of how that comes together, really nice image, and I do appreciate that. This image is a lot of fun. I'm a huge fan of in-camera movement, and I really thank Robert Clay for bringing this image back to our attention. I say back to our attention because in his original comment he made, which we don't see here, but the original comment he made on this image was, we were in Charleston, South Carolina. I was there at a conference. I was presenting at the Improved Photography Retreat Conference, and I had a workshop, a both pre and post conference workshop, and Robert was part of that. And we were in this little square, and this gorgeous flowers, beautiful big trees, and all sorts of just wonderful location, wonderful place. And we had these great flowers, a whole bank of flowers going over the whole thing, over the whole place. And it was just really, as you can see here with the light, it was just, in some locations, just very bright, very stark, bright light. And it just wasn't conducive to your standard ideas of what you want, what you desire in a flower photograph. And so I came up and I said, hey, let's look at this. Let's try this other idea out. And so I did a few ideas on the in-camera motion, just twisting it, simply twisting the camera while having a long shutter speed. And Robert and several of the others were like, hey, that is pretty cool. And so they started doing it. Here we have the axis of rotation pretty much right on center. You can try it out. It really takes some practice to get it off center for that axis of rotation. You can also think about just shifting from one way to the other, up or down, or one way to the other, maybe going at an angle. But here with these flowers, the rotation, the spinning spiral works really well, and it softens that edge, that hard edge that you would have with that harsh light. It softens it, and it really creates an interesting, an interesting pattern, an interesting texture coming through. Notice way out on the edge where the rotation is happening more quickly, because it's way out on the edge, it's traveling more quickly. We have a huge blur. And then, of course, right there in the center, it's just a little blur. And so we have that varying degree of the blur. I'm not sure there's anything I would really do to, quote, enhance this image. I might play around a little more with a vignette, because we do have, it looks like maybe he tried to do a brightened vignette on this possibly, or maybe those are just some of the petals that were out there on the edge. But I might go for a slightly darkening vignette to really just suck those eyeballs into the center. Color feels really good to me. It's nice and soft pastel. I don't think we would want to punch the colors anymore. And it's just a nice, I don't know what the shutter speed is on this, but we're probably looking at a neighborhood of a half a second to, I don't know, 3/4 of a second. But you just take that camera. What I like to do is I like to start turning it and then hit the button and keep it going until it stops, the shutter closes. So you have a nice smooth action going. Because if you try and think click and start turning at the same time, you can start to get a little bit rougher. You want to have that motion already going when you're hitting the button. So just a little tip on that if anyone wants to try in-camera movement. In-camera movement can be a lot of fun. Maybe that should be a topic in the future, to do in-camera movement possibly. We'll see what happens. That's not our topic for June, by the way. Our topic for June, if you want to know, is called Recent Trips. So if you want to get into the Facebook group or email me, Brent at Latitude Photography Podcast, it's Recent Trips. And when you're in the Facebook group, you just do the hashtag Recent Trips when you submit that image. And what we're looking for there is anything in the genre of travel outdoor photography is good. And what I'd like to do is, if possible, since it's called recent, I really want to emphasize the idea, let's try and focus on things that we've done recently, that we've been to in the recent past. So anywhere in 2021. So from January 1 all the way up till today, or whenever it is that you submit, I will do another one of these live sessions at the end of June, and we will do recent trips with that. I look forward to seeing where all of y'all have been going. It's been really busy, really just crazy these last couple of days at work. And like I mentioned in the Facebook group today, that group is my happy place. And I just really looking forward to seeing where you all have been to. And I just love to see that. And Levi joins in, yes, saying yes for ICM, that in-camera movement. Absolutely. When you've got that right subject and it just, there's almost nothing better sometimes. What can also be fun with in-camera movement is when you are doing possibly multiple exposure ideas as well. Now that takes some Photoshop expertise, but if you were to do multiple exposures and blend them in Photoshop, that can be some really cool stuff. But then again, like I mentioned, where you just do a straight up and down type motion with tree trunks especially, that can work really well with in-camera movement. Zoom in a little bit, slow it down to a couple of seconds maybe even, and if you have even what I was doing one time, I had a gimbal head, so it was locked in, only one axis could go, and it was super smooth, just beautiful approach on that. All right, we've had this image up for a little bit, Rick Potts image, so he's joining us from, I think I mispronounced it earlier. My wife will always get after me, and she says it's Nevada, and I come from the Midwest, and I'm so used to saying Nevada, so anyway, there we have it. And Rick says, having only used fixed lens cameras for years, I switched to full frame last year, and I've gotten so much to learn. I've got so much to learn, but I'm having fun while doing it. That's great. This is, yes, such a fun hobby, a fun profession to be in, photography. You know, it's interesting when you ask people, why do you have fun shooting pictures? For me, it's about, well, it's several things, but it boils down to, there is certainly a lot of tech in photography, all the gear, there's a lot of fun with that, but there's nothing about being out there in nature, in this case, some Skagit Valley, tulip fields, the peaceful atmosphere, and pursuing your creative outlet. It's just, yeah, there's heaven on earth type stuff. It's excellent stuff. All right, so went to Skagit Valley in Washington State to take pictures of the tulips. Let's see, with his wife. She wanted a photo of the barn in focus as well as the tulip fields. I saw the sun rising. I thought it'd be fun to get a starburst coming up near the barn. Looking forward to feedback and how I could improve the shots. Yeah, I think good call on the starburst. You used a small aperture. I'm going to guess in the neighborhood of f/16, maybe f/22, somewhere in there. And that's going to create that starburst. But another cool thing that's happening here, because of where that sun is coming through, right in the corner of that barn with the little tree right there and things like that, it's actually the sun is blocked just a little bit. And so it doesn't give us the full-on punching through of the sun, and so that tones it down a little bit. And I think that's actually a good thing on this image, because what it's doing, if we had the full-on punch of the sun, we would probably have some lens flare coming through as well. And with that lens flare, I think you're going to, sometimes it looks really cool, sometimes it's just like, you know, nothing we could do. But here without the lens flare, all of those white and yellow tulips in this foreground area really come out, and they basically, they mimic, they reflect that color of the sun. They, you know, we have these red tulips as well further back in the field. We have the red in the barns. We have the warm colors otherwise in the sky. But those yellow tulips, they really are speaking and basically reflecting that sun, the color in the sun. And I like that connection, those ideas of all these items connecting. The only item that I'm a little bit wondering about in the composition, wondering about in what we're looking at here, and this isn't bad by any means. This is only something where I'm curious about where you're at. Because another thing, when we review images and I don't have you directly to talk to and get your feedback immediately as a conversation would have, These items, the rows of dirt basically in that foreground area, that's the only thing that kind of breaks up the image for me. Everything else is very peaceful, serene, and everything else is very, it all just comes in like a finely fit puzzle. And those items of the rows of dirt, to me, those are just a little bit of a breakup of the pattern of the flowers. Whereas you get to the next row, you don't see that. They're far enough away, you don't see those rows of dirt. How this could have been potentially mitigated, which may not make sense with the overall composition, but lowering your perspective, lowering your viewpoint will emphasize that front row of flowers, and then you might only have then one row of the dirt area, and it would cause those flowers in the front row to come up and overlap the second row of flowers. And I think that would potentially add a little bit of strength to the composition. But here's the problem if you do that. And again, this is where experimenting and understanding when you're on the scene there. Would doing that have caused you to lose your sunburst? If that's the case, then of course you have to do this, because that sunburst, if you had lowered your camera and you lost your sunburst, I think your main interest would have been lost, and you would have a beautiful shot, but I just wouldn't have that little extra that makes it all worth it, that makes it all just click together. So it's great to have that sunburst. It's great to have those, the mountains in the background, the two barns there, it's all coming together. And he replies, yeah, the dirt between the rows bothered me also. If I got closer to the next row, the sun through the barn could be changed or missed. I felt a bit rushed. I hear you. Yeah, and that's, for being a rush shot, I mean, this is amazing. It's really good stuff. You've got great border control. I'm looking at the borders, especially on that tree on the upper right hand corner. There's nothing there that tells me, oh, you should have tilted the camera this way, you should have positioned it this way a little more. I think that's beautifully positioned. There might be one item in the very, very lower, it takes up about 7 pixels. That's how picky I'm being, in the lower right hand corner. That would be so easy to clone out or crop out, so not a big deal. Wandering camera guy, I'd like to think about cropping more like a movie screen, aka crop the bottom off and move the dirt rows. Yes, good recommendation. So if you were to take a little bit of a 16:9, 16:10 type aspect ratio and just remove those items from the foreground, and then I might suggest, if you're going to do that, also consider maybe cropping a little bit off the right side as well to get rid of that one tree. And then you're going to really have that just coming in very strongly. That would probably work really well. Good suggestion, wandering camera guy. It's the username I see, so I appreciate it. It's wonderful. All right, our next picture. Yes, we have Gary Gregg submitting this image. And first thing I'm going to say is I am not a flower expert, so I'm not going to pretend to know exactly what this is. It looks like a type of tulip, but is a little more fancy edge, and so I don't know exactly what this is. And if you know what it is, I would love to have you chime in and let me know. This is whatever it is. Excuse me. I do plan at the new property here, I am slowly starting to make my own flower garden. We're going to have some really awesome stuff. It's about 100 feet to, I might even go the whole width of the property. And then it goes down this little hill. Yes, you bet, Rick. So glad you submitted. Thank you for submitting, and I'm happy to do it. But we're going to have our own, my own flower garden for photography, and it goes down a little hill to our little swamp area. And so we're going to have nice little differences, flowers that want to have, that need the extra water and moisture in the swamp, pond really, I should say, versus those that need to be, full on sun on top of the ridge, that kind of a thing. This image, he submitted a couple of different compositions, and I chose this one because it had, I think, the most going for it of the three that I think it was 3 he submitted. But the really thing that really intrigues me in an image like this, in one sense, it's the details of those water droplets. All around the fringe, all around the edge, we have some down lower on those little curly items that are coming off the flower. But then it's certainly the detail of those stamens in the center. Those was that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 items there in the center of the flower as they come up and around that central item. There's just a lot of great luscious detail for for the image to look at. Let's see, Mariposa Lily. I'm Gary, aka my pick. Fantastic. Thank you, Gary. Mariposa Lily. Fantastic. All right. So the only thing I would look to have a little bit on this image, one way or the other, that would be to maybe crop in a little closer. Well, I can't say the only thing. I might come up with something else, but potentially crop in a little closer or give it a little more breathing room. In particular, that item right on the left-hand side, upper left-hand side, where that one little water droplet is like 2 pixels from touching the edge of the image. When we're that close, for me, it's a little bit of extra visual attention, and it's really hard for my eye to not look at that piece. I'm looking around the image, and then I just start to, there's just that little extra visual attention when it's right there on the edge. So if we were to crop in to just go ahead and chop some of those items off, then my eye doesn't, it just doesn't hang there. It doesn't hover there. The out of focus background area, it's nice and dark, but we don't have it too dark. It's not too bright. It's beautiful. We have a little bit, another thing that's really coming together really well are those little hair-like things in the center of the flower, down further. I think those are coming in really well too. But yeah, the only thing that I really would look at is just a little more breathing room or a little more cropped in. I think the color is coming through very good. I think that the details somehow, now Gary, you can tell me if you did a focus stack or if you just had it just right, but to have detail all the way around the rim of those petals is pretty interesting, pretty incredible, because there's a lot of depth there, and it feels to me like we're potentially working with a focus stack. And so I'd like to know that, if that's possible, to have you tell me that. But otherwise, great composition. I love the uplifting feel. The delicacy of everything is just enhanced with those water drops. That is gorgeous, with the delicacy coming through with that. All right, let's move on. We're only on image 8 of 26. So let's keep it going. Jeremy Schwartz with Appalachian Rhododendrons. And Gary says he didn't do a focus stack. Okay, good. I'm going to go back to that really quick then, super quick on this image with Gary's. And with what we have here, since that's not a focus stack, I mean, we have that magical position of the camera where everything is just perfectly in focus around the rim of the flower, and certainly those items in the central location of the flower too. And then those, whatever camera settings were used, you know, the aperture in particular, to get the right depth of field. That's good stuff. He says backed out a bit, then cropped to get more in focus. Yeah, so when you back out a bit, thank you. That's good information. When you back out a bit, just by extending your distance between you and the subject, you are increasing your depth of field. And so you have a better chance of getting those items in focus. It is definitely tempting when I'm out there shooting flowers. I just got to get in, right? I have to really just hone in on it, and then all of a sudden I'm like, oh wait, my depth of field is like, you know, 0.3 microns or something like that, because I'm so close, and I'm exaggerating, but you get the idea. And when it happens like that, where what Gary did here, where you back off a little bit and just consciously make this decision saying, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and crop so I can have the framing I want, but it will also then increase my depth of field. Yeah, depending on how much you crop. Now, if you crop out and this is like 10% of your overall frame, you know, then I'm like, but I can pretty much tell it's not 10% of your overall frame. But yeah, you do definitely enhance your depth of field. By enhance, I mean making it naturally longer when you back off from the subject. All right, back to Jeremy's image. Jeremy Schwartz, Appalachian Rhododendrons. I've been hiking the Appalachian Trail for over a month. Oh, that's awesome. And a half now. And I've had the joy of seeing a lot of wildflowers. Now that the rhododendrons have finally started blooming, I think they take the title of my favorite flower out here. Yeah, these are rhododendrons. These are interesting. I love the bush. I mean, they can get really big. The clusters, and then they're just, those clusters are everywhere on those bushes. Here we're certainly focusing in on a cluster. We have a few of these, well, one major blossom cluster, blossom whatever, of petals facing us, and then the rest of the cluster, is this nice ball-shaped item. It's interesting with the lighting on this. We have a dark lower right-hand corner and a brighter background upper left-hand corner area, and then these flowers are right in the middle. We have enough depth of field that all the flowers, mostly all of those flower petals, are in focus, but the right ones are certainly in focus. And then those stamens coming out of the flower, we have some energy coming with those lines, those swooping lines coming up. And so definitely I think there's some good ideas here coming in on the composition. I'm trying to think, would I compose it slightly differently? Would I crop it differently? The thing I think I would look for if I were shooting this image, I guess I'm just not sure which way the main stem goes. I see in the lower portion center, I see this dark item angles a little bit to the left. And it feels like that's the main stalk or the main stem that the cluster is mounted to, is sticking on. And so I guess I would say, let's either go ahead and zoom in to crop that out a little bit, or zoom back, step back just a hair, so we could use that maybe potentially as a compositional element. Now, maybe that item down there also is just one of those leaves, because we have some leaves coming from the lower right-hand area, moving up as it goes off to the right hand of the frame. But and so maybe that's one of those leaves in the background. So that's the only thing. I'm just wondering, would that element, that main stalk that it's on, would that be something that we could use as a compositional element? And if not, then I might suggest let's try and zoom in a little further with it to really emphasize the presence of those buds, the presence of those, I should say, petals, and see what we can do to maximize our interest there. Great color, I think. Another thing that really works well, I mean, I know Jeremy didn't have anything to do with this, but the little bit of greenery in those top petals on each of those petal clusters, the fact that matches the greenery in the background and whatnot, that's just serendipity right there. All right, a nice close-up shot here by Mark. And I don't have any details as to what this is. It looks a bit like, I know I'm going to guess it's not Tithonia, but it looks like Tithonia, which the reason I say it's not is because Tithonia usually has more the, it's also called Mexican sunflower, but it has orange petals instead of the purplish, pinkish type petals. This is water droplets, working really well. It gives that fresh sense in the image, and it's getting a little too hot now in my office. So I'm going to take off my hat, and you're going to see my glistening forehead here. But we have that shallow depth of field. We have the good detail right there on the central part of the flower where we want to see it. Those items, those are the pieces of interest, and that's where we want to see it. Now, this image probably would also work. Imagine for ourselves for a moment if those foreground petals were actually in focus, the edge of those foreground petals, if those were in focus, then everything else would be very much out of focus. I think that would work too. I don't think you'd have to move your composition at all. It's just have those be in focus. That could also be very interesting. And possibly it might even be more interesting to have that, because we would then have that very thin slice of that petal, that very thin, delicate petal being the only thing that's in focus, and that would recede towards the background and go out of focus as we're going back towards the center of the flower. We would then have also those water droplets on that forward area, nicely in focus. That would just be something that your eye just cannot look at anything else, kind of a thing. And that would be pretty interesting, I think. Overall, a generally good composition as far as the location of the positioning of the flower. We have a little bit of that stem underneath, so we can see the supporting element. It's not like it's hovering. It's not like there's any visual mystery going on. So good color coming through as well. Good exposure overall. And so in general, I think it's pretty decent. It's just, I wonder what it would be like. Can we use our mind's eye to say, yeah, what would it be like if those forward items were in focus instead? That could be pretty interesting. And I kind of think, in that central, a little bit off to the right, we have this one petal going off kind of across another petal. It would look kind of like that, only right there up front, right there, front and center, ready to go. All right, we're going on to image number 10 out of our 26. And this is submitted by Steve Blakely. Jack in the Pulpit taken at one of our many nature preserves in the southwest Michigan. Used a Canon 70D and Photoshop Elements for processing. He says, Southwest Michigan, you've got a great, the St. Joe Lighthouse. I love that. I should share that picture sometime. Shot it so many years ago, but my goodness, what a beautiful spot. I just love that lighthouse. All right, the Jack in the Pulpit. I'm going to guess this image does not have, they're not using, Steve is probably not using a polarizer filter. And I would suggest considering trying out a polarizer filter. The composition I find actually okay, generally okay. I'll probably talk a little bit about that in a moment. But what would happen with a polarizing filter, that leaf in the upper right-hand corner area, not fully in the corner, but just getting that direction, it is a little bit glaring, a little bit bright. And that polarizer would go ahead and tone down that glare and remove that glare because there's going to be a sheen. There's a little bit of a moisture sheen on the leaf, and the polarizer is going to be able to cut that out and going to be able to really let that green just vibrate. And then that would also happen in the background. So in the background where you have all these things way out of focus, there's a few items that are a little bit brighter, and I'm fairly convinced that is just that glancing reflection off the surface of the leaves. And as far as the composition is concerned, I think the only thing that somewhat bothers me is that major leaf on the right-hand side. I think I would prefer to go ahead and say, if we could turn the camera a little bit towards the left, shifting the subject more to the right of the frame, and we'll crop that leaf off even more. Or go the other direction, step back maybe just a hair, so you have both the Jack in the Pulpit section, that thing of interest, and the leaf fully in. It's just we're cutting off not enough of that leaf. That's one of those areas where it's kissing the edge, and my eye tends to be like, I wish I had more, I wish I had less. But we have good detail in the leaf and good detail in that flower item itself, and so certainly we have some good things going there. I'm trying to think if I would recommend a vignette. I don't think so. Those things in the background are dark enough. Everything else is coming in. I don't know the shutter speed. It feels like there might be a little bit of a wind potentially blowing it. I'm not sure if I'm picking up any softness of motion blur or not, but it potentially has a little bit of that too. It's tough to tell on the size that I'm looking at it. All right, this next image by Darren Whiteley. Around this time of year, out on California's central coast, we wake up to the marine layer coating the landscape most mornings. While not great for landscape photography, it does provide a lovely diffused light which softens the shadows and gives you a chance to capture shots of the spring flowers before the harsh, bright sun breaks through. Absolutely. So he's talking about this wonderful fog layer and how thick that can be, and it's just like having this huge soft box delivered for you wherever you go in nature, basically. And so here we have a relatively macro shot of this white flower. And here's the thing. There's a couple things I love about this image. The thing that really is working for this image is simplicity of the composition, for sure. Simplicity of the tones, the colors, A little bit warm in the center. This is what's really interesting to me too. It's warm in the center and it's cool as it gets to the edge, the outer edge. It's darker in the center too, and cool and brighter as you get to the outer edges, especially to the top. And all of those things, it just elevates the softness, the delicacy, the intricacy of the flowers, the petals. Most everything is in really sharp focus as well. And those items up towards the top of the frame that aren't in focus, I don't need them to be in focus. My eye doesn't look at them and say, you know, I just wish. No, if it were, because those are even brighter, then my eye would just hover up there and that's all it would do. But we have loads of interest right here in the central part, the lower part as well. And the eye is just feasting on all these goodnesses. So simplicity, and then the overall just general positioning and composition. Even I would say that care was taken on those border elements. You know, we don't have any petals that are just barely, like that petal at the bottom. If it was coming to a point where it comes to its point, and then that point was the edge of the frame, then I would say no. That's another problem. We don't want that to happen. It's too close to the edge. Here we've got that space, and it doesn't bother us. It doesn't bother my eye anyway. So yeah, good attention to composition here. And then certainly with your exposure. An image like this, the camera is going to look at it and just want to darken it like mad. And it's our job as a photographer to know what the camera is going to want to do, and we got to bump it up. You know, at least on an image like this, we're going to go at least 1.5, 2/3, 1 2/3 stop overexposed according to what the camera thinks. And this is where live view with your overlay histogram makes perfect sense. You can just dial it in without hardly even thinking about your exposure, because you're just looking at the histogram and you just get it until you get it right. Move it until you get it right. So yeah, good deal there. Bird of Paradise is our next one. There's just something about Birds of Paradise that is very intriguing. It's the colors, it's the shape, it's the leaves of the plant that they're on. Everything is just really coming together when it comes down to Birds of Paradise. So Peter Turnbull, as it is only 2 weeks out from winter here in Brisbane, Australia, it is a bit hard to get a shot of spring flowers. I totally hear you. And again, thank you. Another submission from Australia. This is amazing. I love it. Thank you so much for submitting anyway. That's great. Luckily, our temperatures ranges between 10 and 30 degrees, 50 to 86. Thank you for that Fahrenheit conversion. Year-round. Wow. This is an image of a bird of paradise I found in a garden in the center of the city. It was shot with available light, and I took some of the sharpness out of the pic. It gave it a more of a painted feel. Flowers aren't my usual subject matter, so keen for tips on how to improve. All right. Yes, I can tell you took some sharpness out. I'm going to guess that you took the, now the thing is escaping me, clarity slider, and you slid it towards the negative side. This looks to me, anyway, that clarity was given a negative value. I'm not going to say I'm necessarily bothered by that, because we do have in this flower, in this plant form, if you will, we have some major graphic elements coming through. Those two major orange swatches, the swashes of color, that blue element, and then the major green leaf kind of idea coming off to the left. So we do have some really interesting and really focused in overall shapes, and they're creating their own value, their own energy presence, shall we say. And while they kind of point up and they lead your eye out towards the edge of the frame, thankfully what I say too is all of that area is really dark. It might be a little too dark, but it's dark and it holds your eye in, and so you just come right back to the center. So all the energy, you have this boom, you have this explosion of energy, visual energy coming out, and then you can't help but come back in, out and in. And I think, to me, that's a good thing. The only thing that I might look to change, I don't know what it is. It looks like it's a leaf that's kind of invading our space here a little bit. But at the base of the the blossom, where all the color comes together, and then where that leaf comes down on the left side, it comes down underneath. There's a leaf that kind of cuts across right in front of it. I think I would have played around with trying to move that if that's possible to do. Sometimes it's not about, you try and move it and it just pops back into place. And yeah, I get that. So sometimes it doesn't work out. But that's the only thing that's kind of bothering me about the composition is just that little, I want that smooth, that full leaf to be just smooth. Now here's the other thing where if I were to see an image like that, I could totally see where I might feel that makes that element too strong. And then I wouldn't be able to look at anything else. So to have it broken up may be working. This is one of the things about photography. And I've mentioned it to people before where in some cases, I feel like I'm arguing with myself. Because it's like, what about this? What about that? This or that, this or that, this or that. And sometimes it feels like you just can't make up your mind. And I'm not... sometimes it does feel that way. That's just the way it is. But it's good to talk these things through. It's good to think about, it's good to contemplate and consider these options, because how will we know what really works unless we really work over the scene and we really try the options? And as he says, it's not his usual thing. He's keen for tips. So I'm trying to talk it through and just say, yeah, it might work, but I also might be, leading you down the wrong path where this just, maybe it doesn't make sense to do that. I think it will. And most of the times when I'm looking at something like that, yeah, it does make sense to do those things. But there's nothing like experimenting, nothing like seeing it happen. This is why with my design students, they kind of, I probably sound like a broken record to them, because when they're looking at the options, looking at the ideas, I'll be like, did you sketch it out? Did you try it? Did you do this? Did you do that? You gotta be able to envision it. You have to be able to see it to really understand if that's a good thing or not. At least a rough representation of it anyway, to understand if it's a good decision or not. So as it relates to your less on the clarity and bringing in the softness, here's what I would suggest you try next. And that is to go ahead and do that overall, because I think it helps in the overall image. But are there 2 or 3, I would probably say 3, locations, 3 objects, 3 areas of the image where you could reverse that function, where you could say, you know what, right here, right there, in this location over here as well, whatever those areas might be, you're going to go ahead and leave a little bit of detail there. We would not want it to be something that's so starkly different that it just feels like, it sticks out like a sore thumb. But if we were to be able to say, yes, here's an area that has a little more detail, and then my goodness, the eye will just go right there, and it'll just have a feast on that detail. And that could be pretty interesting to consider as well. It is an overall it feels a little bit dark. For the most part, personally I like that, especially with the greens being dark. But that central portion of the flower, if everything was overall maybe 1/3 to a 1/2 stop brighter, I could see that still working pretty well. I would definitely not want to go any darker than this. All right, our next image, we are now going to be halfway through 13 of our 26 images. This is by Sandy Glenn Brown. And we have, oh boy, I can't remember if that's going to be considered an iris or an orchid. It looks more like an iris, I think. But anyway, like I said, I'm not a flower professional, but over the years, I'm definitely going to become more familiar with lots of different flowers. All right, so the thing on this image, that central location of our main bud, our main petals and such, coming together really well. Great texture, great focus, sharpness, everything coming really well. I think the exposure is fantastic. The element coming off to the stick, if you will, coming off to the lower right area, I presume that's what is holding what it's mounted to, what it's connected to on the flower, on the bush. But those elements in the background where we have, looks like more buds, more blossoms, they're pointing down or they're pointing away. they're a little bit on the distracting side of things in that they are fairly bright. They're definitely out of focus, but I think if we were to be able to simplify the composition a little more, I think it's going to really hone the eye in on this one subject. And then the other thing about the one subject, it feels like it's kind of laying over a little bit, and maybe, yeah, I don't know. It just feels, for some reason, I'm wanting to either zoom in a little further or otherwise tilt the camera a little bit. It feels like it's kind of laying over, but again, without familiarity of the subject, I'm a little bit, I have to say, I just don't know if this is what I want to say, compositionally speaking. And this is one of the things that I talk about in, I was just thinking of this actually, in one of my lessons that I'm doing. If you're unaware, I'm producing a new course. I'm going to be releasing it under my Latitude Photography School here very soon. I'm actually looking to release it fully in July, but I talk about, and this is a perfect example of this case, but I talk about the idea of when we are there as photographers and we are photographing the subject, and then we get home, we get to the hotel room, whatever it is, and we're working on the image. We have that experience of it being right there for us, with us, and we know what we're trying to see or do with that image. But for someone like myself, I'm already saying I'm not a flower expert, so I don't know the exact flower this is. I don't know the nature of this flower. I don't know the history. I don't know how this flower grows. Okay, so there's already some things where I am already at a disadvantage. So I am not going to have the same experience, the same reaction to this image that Sandy is, or that anyone else who knows this flower and knows how it grows, who knows the environment in which it grows. They're going to have a different experience when they look at this image because they're going to have that background knowledge. So it's our job then as photographers to try and get that point across to those who do have that background knowledge, but also to provide something. Hopefully we can also still provide something to those who don't have that background knowledge. That's a huge challenge in photography. And that's where our basic ideas of general principles of design come in. And if we can hone in on those, then even if someone is completely ignorant about whatever the subject is, like I basically am here on this subject, then when we have those strong principles of design coming in, and then the image still has a possibility of reaching that person who doesn't have any idea what it is, because they'll look at it, it's a beautiful flower, I know it's a flower, but it just takes on a different sense then because of the history that we have or don't have with that subject. And that's what I think could help this image a little bit, is to say some of those items in the background are a little bit distracting, so let's simplify it, or let's recompose, let's find a way to emphasize the subject so that those who don't know what it is might still have the same amount of enjoyment or the same amount of value in it that you have, or that people who do understand what this subject is, so that they have the same ideas too. All right. Hopefully I didn't click it twice. There we go. This next image, very low angle, Jeff Grotti, and I remember him from last time, rhymes with karate. All right. He says, when I came across this small field of daisies along the side of the road, I immediately knew that I had to photograph them. I got permission from the landowner and agreed that I would give him a print if they allowed me to photograph on their property. I make that deal a lot because I didn't know if I would get back to the location. I had to make use of the light I had and make the best of it. Midday sun is not ideal lighting. I took a bunch of shots and then I didn't hit the see more button. But anyway, the midday lighting, I think you did the right thing for midday lighting. And the beauty of this shot is we do get that sense in the lower central area of the image. We have that bright hovering aura, that hovering essence that is the sun, but it's blocked by the flowers, so it's not causing all sorts of all sorts of, troubles with overexposure, lens flare, all sorts of things like that. We have this, kind of ant on the ground view where everything is just coming in from all angles, and it's a very wide angle shot too. This kind of image, I think, is a lot of fun because it gives us just that it's a different point of view. And a shot like this, I don't know, in some circles it might feel cliche, but I don't know. For me, I still don't get tired of these types of images. The things that are working, we have some symmetry. That's a design principle that we're gonna, when we're thinking about balance, it's largely symmetrical. And so I think the one thing that actually I can't get my eye off of now that I see it, right there in the center, top center, that one thing that comes pointing straight down, and it points to that flower bud that is all alone in the center of the frame. But that item, that leaf, that's top and center coming all the way down, that is a little bit distracting to me because it's right in the center. Yes, we have the symmetry going on and everything like that, but that is a major element. It's right in the center. If that were off to the side or something like that, I don't think it would have as major of a presence for me. And so that's the one thing that I would probably, if you were to twist my arm, I would probably kind of have a little thing to say about it. And I've already said my little tiny thing. The color is great. I think otherwise the composition is great with the white on the blue, the white daisies backlit on the blue, the deep blue sky. The green is coming through very well. I think whatever processing decisions you made, from what I'm seeing here in our Facebook image, yeah, it's coming through very well. So I think that is good. And I see Elise Bender, she made a comment. I use and teach this type of perspective in several of her courses. It's always fun to see it used by others. Yes, you might try embracing the sun with a bit of solar flare too. Well, think about also, if you were to get the sun in there, you're probably going to get that starburst, and that could be pretty interesting as well. If it's possible to shift it so it's coming over or just barely to the side of one of those flower buds, flower blossoms, you might be able to get the starburst effect coming from that as well. And I think that could be pretty cool. All right, a few more images. Image 15. Here we go. Linda Kane's Mooney. Fawn lilies, she says, from East Sook, British Columbia. Hey, that's on the southern coast of Vancouver Island. Boy, howdy, I want to get up there someday. Oh, it looks so gorgeous. A Latitude regular, Drake Dick, he comes from the Sook, British Columbia area. And yeah, I had him on the show once, when we first brought him on the show, he was telling us all about his area. I was like, oh my goodness, that sounds so amazing. I have to get up there. So yeah, pretty much when the border is open and I can take my car across on the ferry, that will shoot towards the top of my next travel to-do list. All right, in this image, these lilies, they're so wonderful. I mean, the stem goes up, they edge over, and then the petals, they curve up again. It's like it's going up, oh shoot, and then it's facing downwards, but then those flowers, oh, they're going up again. It's great. I love the positioning, the idea of these flowers and how we're shooting across. So it emphasizes those forms. It emphasizes those curves. I think that's very good. The things that I find a little bit challenging on this image is going to be generally the composition. So that item on the right-hand side, that flower on the right-hand side is cut off a bit. It feels to me that we should include that one because it would those are the two flowers towards the right. Those are the two flowers that are the main interest, the main point here. And then we have that other item on the lower left-hand corner that is cut off. It's not, it's a bud, a blossom that is not open fully. Well, not open at all, really. And so the stem comes up, it comes down, and then just hangs its blossom down where it's not opened yet. I would totally crop that out completely. Maybe take something and move it to the side so it's not in my frame or something like that. But I just find that to be something that's, if without it, I think it would simplify the frame a little bit and it would help the overall composition. I might go ahead and suggest a very subtle vignette on this one. The brighter tonal values in the upper left-hand corner are a little bit too bright. They compete with the flowers. But yeah, these lilies are gorgeous, and I would say work them over until you find a composition that really simplifies the scene and allows you to really emphasize those buds, those blossoms, I should say, those blossoms for what they are. All right, I really do, whoops, I hit the wrong button on my other screen here. Terry Brockway, Haldren. This is her, she says, original photo. She submitted two, one with a little bit of an edit and texture, and I really like this original photo. The colors are amazing here. Even that really bright color in the lower left-hand corner, while I am usually saying, watch your borders and make sure you only have things there that are supposed to be there, but that bright splash of color mirrors the a bit more muted colors up above. And so actually I kind of find it acceptable. I don't find that annoying. Then this tulip, this really rich colored tulip, is just wonderful with its subtle textures. The texture is coming through, a little bit of moisture coming through, the shape, the forms, everything coming through very nicely. I'm trying to think if I would change anything else compositionally. It's hard to say. It is a nice image where that tulip is opening just a little bit, and yeah, it's just wonderfully simplified. We still have the background nicely out of focus, so it's hard to say what exactly I would do differently on this image. I'm gonna brood over it a little bit. Maybe I'll come back to it. All right, this next image by Randy Gamer, this is a very dramatic image. Very dramatic lighting, very starkly, brightly lit central area on this flower. Brilliantly rich purple buds, petals, I should say. And then, these central portions of the flower, they're just, they're yellow, so they're a perfectly complementary color to this purple. And lots of good detail there. Again, I'm looking at it. I'm trying to think, would I really change the composition? I think that petal to the right-hand side gets a little bit close to the edge, but it's not terrible because it is so dark. The edge of that petal is so dark. It's just, that's not a visual tension for me. My eye doesn't go to it and just hang there. It hangs right in the center where it should, and then we have wonderful supporting elements. Even that element in the lower right-hand corner, the beautiful supporting essence of purple, another blossom, another set of another tulip bud there, and then of course again on the left hand side with a more prominent one. I wonder, I don't have any commentary from Randy, but I wonder what kind of post-production was done, or if this was more naturally lit like this, just to make it more dark on those edges like that. If you did this in post-production, I don't have any problem with that. I appreciate the strong attention that we have right there on the flower. Now, because of the nature of those shadows of the stamens, the shadows there on the inside of those petals, that makes me feel like there's a flash going on, because we do have a different quality to the light in all the other areas of the image. It feels that way anyway. And so it seems like we have some kind of flash going on, and that, yeah, that's interesting. I like that. That is very, I'm going to tell you, I'm not one to use flash much in my nature photography, whatever, landscape, city work, whatever. Flash just isn't something that I use a whole lot. But when you do use it, if used appropriately, like we pretty much have here, it can really add that extra bang, that extra punch that is needed. All right, this next one we have Linda Kane's Mooney. This might be the second one that she has here. Let's see. Skunk Cabbage in Bloom, West Coast Vancouver Island Forest. Yeah, here's these things are pretty big. Certainly like the water droplets on them, the shallow depth of field. So we have the background is blurry. The thing about it is, I would seek, I think, to put this in one corner or the other. And also, since we are focusing on just the one item, I certainly know these things grow pointing straight up, but inflicting a little bit of angle might help in a subject like this, where it's just a very substantial subject, and it could increase a little bit of the energy that we might place on the subject too, if you were to angle it. So what if it were to come from a little bit from the lower left to the upper right corner, and we have this little angle going? It changes the graphic nature of the subject, and probably could say, you know what, here's some visual energy coming into it because of it. All right, I think I would definitely recommend a vignette as well. Those background areas are a little bit on the bright side of things, and so a vignette could be very helpful as well. All right, let's take a look at this next image. I believe, this is probably, those of you that are watching, you can correct me. Is this a dogwood? I think it's a dogwood. I know I have another image that is cherry blossoms, but the dogwood. And this is by Chris Brizendine. And one thing that's exciting about this one, Chris is actually a recent graduate of mine from the university that I teach at. So I'm thrilled to have him here and taking a look at submitting these images as well, submitting some images as well in for this as well. Just a second, I need to text my wife, because I'm very thirsty and I would love a drink of water, and I forgot to bring some out here with me. All right. So with these flowers, the sunlight is a little bit on the harsh side of things, and it is not too bad though. Usually, many times when we think of doing flower photography, we're all like, get us in the soft light. Let's see what's going with making these things feel, like soft buds, like they are, right? But this isn't terrible. It's certainly not bad. I would just like to see if there's any chance that we could maybe tone down those highlights just a little bit in post-production to reduce contrast just a hair. It might help feel a little more soft. You could also try what the name is escaping me now, but with that bird of paradise, where we use the clarity and went on the negative side of things, that might work on this image too, to soften a few things just a little bit. Overall, I'm not sure I'm really catching any strength in the composition. That's where I would look to see, what can we do for placing the object, placing the background elements, so there's a stronger conversation, a stronger supporting element there. And I'm looking for something that I could suggest as something to do with this. And I guess what I'm going to say is potentially zoom in a little further. So if you were to crop off the right-hand third of the image, and if you were to crop off those top two blossoms, you're going to then create a composition that focuses every bit of your attention on those blossoms that are left behind. And then you have those items to the left that are out of focus as a very strong supporting element. And then you have those two areas that you're left to look at, and it would simplify the composition a little bit. So I think that's what I would recommend doing on this one. All right, let's see the next image where my button is not clicking. There we go. And with this one, these are the cherry blossoms. And thank you to my wife for bringing me some water with ice in it too. I should bring a thermometer out here and see how hot it is in my office. Anyway, back to Nathan Goldberg's image. Cherry blossoms are a big part of spring flowers in Toronto, where peak bloom lasts only a few weeks at best. This was taken a few years ago in one of the big parks in the city, which unfortunately has been closed to public viewing the last 2 springs due to the pandemic. That is unfortunate. But I'm thrilled that you were able to get this image back when you did and that you shared it. Thank you, Nathan. This is great. So this is kind of going along the same ideas of that image we just saw with Chris, where we have simplified the composition. Now, certainly we have a lot fewer blossoms here, and so it's going to be a little easier to have that simplified idea. But notice that supporting element in the background. I think the exposure is coming in really well. Those blossoms are just beautifully exposed. They're nice and bright, not too bright. They feel soft and delicate. We've got detail where we need the detail. And then those soft areas in the background looking really good. And then the rest of the surrounding area on the left-hand side, completely blown out. You don't even know what those subjects are back there. You could have Elvis walking by and you wouldn't know because it's so far out of focus. So I think good job on that. Now here is something that I'm curious about. We have a little bit of these warm hues right in the center of these blossoms, but they only really show up prominently in 2 of these blossoms, the one front and center that is in focus, and then that one in the background that's out of focus. And the only thing that I'm curious about is there a way to make that a little more of a thing, a little more prominent? I don't know, because that other blossom that we see, it's not really present there. And so I'm just wondering, this is where, again, I have to be there to see the subject and to understand what it is. But this also then comes into another idea that I like to really emphasize, and that is when you're there, let the subject soak in a little bit. Stop and pause. In fact, if you were listening to the podcast in the most recent episode where I had Mark Silber on the show, we talked about that a little bit, to where you just let it soak in a little bit. Let the scene be absorbed by you, let your presence, come a little more in tune with what you have before you. And if those red items, to me, this is what initially I'm drawn to, because you have these reddish pink items that could be potentially very interesting. And that's what I'm drawn to myself. And I'm just wondering, if that were the thing that was important to me, what kind of image would I make there, if that's what I was trying to emphasize? And so that's just how I react to this overall image. Right here, or the overall subject, I should say, right here with this image, I'm looking at it and I'm saying, yeah, nice composition. And I actually like how that one petal, as it comes up from the bottom, the stem comes up from the bottom, aiming towards the left. And then we have this one stem with this one blossom up coming to the right as it goes back towards the center of the frame. And then that overlaps some petals, some blossoms in the background. That's fine with me. I love the layering that's happening there. So lots of good things working in this composition. All right, we are coming to the home stretch. We are on image 21 of 26. And let's see, Natasha, every spring, our local conservatory does a stunning orchid exhibit. Given my complete inability to keep an orchid alive, repeat offender here, I love it, I'm grateful for the opportunity to photograph these beauties. And then she tells us ISO 500, f5.0, 1/60th of a second, 120 millimeter on Nikon D780, single shot. No tripods were allowed, so I wasn't able to focus stack any of my images. Yeah, that's too bad. I understand those restrictions, but that's just too bad when tripods aren't allowed. So you're unable to get the image. If you wanted to get a focus stack, like she says in this case, was unable to do that, that's just too bad. But we can think about maybe doing what we saw earlier. I think, was it Gary that did an image earlier where he stepped back. Yes, he says he backed up a bit and cropped to get more in focus. So if you step back a little bit, you're going to have slightly longer depth of field. It just means you have to crop and you lose some of your pixels. All right, so this overall composition, I do find it a little bit on the crowded side of things, because we have this element kind of sort of facing us as it's facing downwards. We then have those blossoms behind it. And so those are out of focus, and that's fine. It's just there's a lot of them, and there's a little bit of chaos going on there. It's really gorgeous with those leaves going off into the darkness. I love that. I think that's really gorgeous. But those variety of blossoms just all kind of gathered right there. It's a little bit chaotic for me. And I would either look to have even shallower depth of field, or try and find a way, I don't know, lifting that one blossom up further, finding a composition where it's further separated from its background, different ways of going about that. Overall, certainly the blossom that we have pictured is beautiful, and we have a good shapes coming through on that. So I do appreciate that for sure. All right, here's our next image, and that is from Brett Baker. And, oh, I've seen these, but I can't remember. These are the types of flowers that I think hummingbirds like. One thing I'm super curious about is that item that's on the inside of the flower. It looks like there's some kind of bug or some kind of whatever going on the inside of the flower. That might just be the stamens of the flower. But this is rather interesting. I like the color, the pattern on the petals of the flower, on the overall blossom of the flower. The thing that gets me a little bit on this image is it's a bit harsh. The lighting is a bit harsh. And this is where I would say use some kind of object, some kind of item that can shade the overall scene. Since we're really zoomed in, you don't have that big of a scene, and something that can shade it. And I'm looking really quickly to see if I have my shade at arm's reach. Is it over here maybe? No, I'm not seeing it. When I just went to do a shoot with Lori up there at the Growwiser place, I used this collapsible reflector. And if you don't have to use the reflector, you can use it as a shade as well. And so you just put it between the sun and your subject, and it really softens the light. Now, the problem that you have with that is if you're getting some background elements in your shot and those aren't shaded, then that's just really bad because your subject is very dark compared to that background. That's going to be very, very bright, and you don't want to do that. But overall, with the composition, I think this would actually, if you were to tilt the camera up just a little bit to bring that blossom down in the frame, and then take that light and soften it a bit, oh my goodness, this thing could just be amazing. Woo, we're at 1 hour and 21 minutes already. Even when I'm by myself, I can't do these very quickly, can I? Hey, we've got good images, lots of good things to say, lots of good things to talk about with these images. All right, Joe Vargas. Looks like some more orchids coming through here. Now, this is a nice collection. Was it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? So we have 6 overall blossoms, it looks like. But it doesn't feel like 6, because oftentimes when we look at a subject, we're like, odds, 3, 5, 7, whatever. And it just seems to feel more complete that way. This does still have a sense of completion. I like the shapes of what's going on here. It's almost, we have a single line. We have those 2 initial ones, and then it splits into 2 rows of 2 going up as it goes up towards the top. And there's a nice S-curve. Well, no, it's really more of it's a little bit of an S-curve, more of a strong C-curve with a little bit of a tail at the top. Yeah, those 2 blossoms on the left-hand side, top left-hand, those are the ones that almost feel a little bit odd as it relates to the overall shape. Because if you were to take those from the bottom and you go up towards the top and you stay on the right-hand side, that's a beautiful C-curve. When you throw in those others, you get that little S-curve going if you were to connect it to those lower 2. With that kind of thing going on, with those leading lines, those implied lines, because there's tons of lines within the flowers, but those items are having this certain cadence, this visual cadence. There's lots of potential interest there. What we want to do is try and capitalize on that. And because they're supported pretty well with those leaves in the lower right-hand corner, I think we're doing pretty good at that. The only, quote, problem I see here on this image, that background is extremely dark, and so we just don't have any detail back there. I would like to see some kind of presence of the environment for the detail back there. That's, it's probably just a personal preference, personal taste. All right, this image, Levi Jansen, the Pasque flowers. or is it Pasquet flowers? I am not sure on the pronunciation of that. There are some of the first flowers that bloom in the springtime, at least in my area. Sometimes they will even pop up out of the snow. Oh, that'd be cool. Here is one of the photos I captured in late March at a local prairie in south central Minnesota. Yes, the thing I really, really appreciate about this image are those dead leaves and everything else in the scene that really showcases the environment for these flowers. And here we have the very first signs of rejuvenation, of life springing forth. And that is gorgeous. That's beautiful. We have a little bit of a brighter sense, a little bit of a harsher light than we might normally think we want to have in a shot like this, but actually works really well. It's still quite soft. It's just there's some intensity there. It's intentionally made bright by the exposure. And so it's bright, it's uplifting, the happy yellow centers, everything is just coming in really well. The only thing I might suggest just subtly differently is to darken the background just a hair. And I'm talking like maybe 1/10 of a stop, maybe, 0.2 of a stop. Just very subtly darken that a little bit. But you have 3 main buds in the foreground, 1 bud in the background that's out of focus. And it's just all about that new rejuvenation of spring that's beautiful. And even, again, those items in the foreground, the fact that we have that detail there it tells the whole story. And that's, I think, what's really important and really interesting with this image. All right, we are down to the wire. Second to last image. Gerald Sargent. Nothing says Texas like longhorns and bluebonnets. And I just had to throw this one in because I love those longhorns. I love the light on this image too. A nice, very low light. The bluebonnets are coming in really well. And then, of course, the longhorns. As I look at the image and I'm trying to think, would I do anything differently? I guess the only thing I would make sure I would do is just to take a bunch of pictures as those cattle are moving throughout and seeing what we can do to get various compositions of the positions of where those cattle are located. Because that one in the center that's looking right at us, his rear leg goes right into the neck of the other one. And then that cattle that's on the far left-hand side, he's bending down, he's grazing, but his face, his body goes into the body of the other one. There's nothing that's super wrong with that. It's just that I would like to see some variety coming through so we could have some options to pick the very best one. As far as the overall environment, the fact that we've zoomed in, we don't have any sky, I think that's a great decision to make because we're focusing in all of our visual attention on the cattle, on the cow, and on the flowers. And then that light, like I said, the light is just gorgeous. It's great. So there's lots of good things coming through in this image. Again, the only thing I can point to is the position of the cattle. Be patient, work it, see what you can do to capture multiple ideas of where they're at, and then you can pick the best one. Because you definitely don't have the ability to say, hey, you over there, I need you to come over this way and stuff like that. That's just not going to happen. It does look like potentially that one in the middle that's looking at us, it looks like he is looking at what's Gerald doing. This is pretty crazy. All right, our last picture of the evening. Woohoo! Terry Brockway Holdren. So this one, she says, have hit my passion, flower photography. Once COVID hit and I was home so much, I spent lots of time in my garden. I then discovered several online courses that I participated in over the last year. I have become a huge follower of Kathleen Clemen and Belmond, Rosie Lamond, and Harold Davis. Sweet. So this one... I wanted to end on this one, and I wanted to also include this one because we have a really good composition in the idea that we cropped in, we got, we cropped into that point to where we're not just getting things on the edge, we're really cropping in. And the thing that also kind of is interesting to me, we have that slit between those two items, those two petals, and we can see that element that is in the center of the flower. And certainly that's in focus, as well as where the petals meet the stem. That's in focus. We have a beautiful stem. We have a beautiful green background all around. Beautiful lighting coming through. There's lots of really good things coming in positively on this image. I think the only thing I might experiment with, as I'm looking at it, I'm just not sure. I don't know if we have I'm guessing we don't have a polarizer filter. I'm getting a little bit of glare, and sometimes those glare items, those reflections off the edges of the petal, those actually help us. But I would experiment potentially with a polarizer to see if we could richen some of that color just a hair. But again, sometimes, especially on that right-hand side where we have that little bit of that glistening, that can actually help provide that dimension, that shape that we want to see there. And that helps give that overall form to the petal. And that's good stuff. I really like seeing that coming through. So again, that's one of those items where I would experiment with it and see if it actually enhances or does not enhance. And that was, again, the idea of a polarizer. Now, if she did use a polarizer, I'm not seeing that anything's mentioned here using a polarizer, then you have the opportunity. You can turn it, and certain things will cut out glare, and other glares will come in at other locations. You might have the opportunity to select which area, which item has that glare or not. All right, that is it. That wraps it up for us with our look at spring flowers. Once again, let me do this. Here we go. Once again, we are going to look at recent trips for the month of June. So throughout the whole month of June until towards the end. I haven't selected the specific date. You can pretty well guarantee it's most likely going to be the last Thursday in June. That tends to be the date that we end up doing these live reviews. So as you look at your calendar, just get it in a day or two before that last Thursday in June is a good idea for that. And then we'll review those at that time right here on YouTube once again. And if I can, I'll bring on one of my Latitude regulars. Otherwise, I'll just do it by myself again, and we'll just have fun with it there. This will also be an episode on the regular podcast. I will put all of these screenshots that I have right here that you see. I will put those in the Facebook group so we can look at them all once again. I'll also put them on the show notes website, latitudephotographypodcast.com, so you can see them there. And of course, this video will live on here on the YouTube for as long as I have a YouTube channel. So it'll be here forever, basically. And yeah, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it. I do want to give a quick shout out before I leave about my workshop where we're going to be looking at fall color. Waterfall color is what I'm calling it. We're going to go to the Minnesota's North Coast, and I invite you to take a look at the website. Just look at brentbergherm.com, and you can then click on the workshop tab. It's the first item there in the workshop tab. We're going to spend these 6 days, that's a Sunday through Friday, we're going to spend these 6 days going up the north coast of Minnesota, photographing all sorts of waterfalls, all sorts of fall color, and then of course Lake Superior is right there. There's going to be some awesome overviews of Lake Superior, and I'm very much looking forward to doing this workshop, and I hope to see you there. So thank you again so much for being here. Really do appreciate it, and as you would like, please feel free to leave comments down below. Make sure you like the video if you learned something, if you found something valuable here. I so appreciate it, and don't forget to subscribe here to the channel as well. Thank you so much. Have a great evening, and we'll catch you next time. Happy shooting!